The streets were lined with manicured lawns and gated communities, each home a quiet symbol of old money and unspoken rules. To outsiders, it looked like the perfect slice of suburban comfort. But to those who didn't fit its mold, Oak Ridge was a town that smiled while shutting its doors. Officer Brad Turner had lived here his entire life. 45 years old, broad shoulders, sharp gaze, he saw himself as more than just a cop. He was the town's gatekeeper. It was his job, in his mind, to keep things in order, to make sure Oak Ridge stayed how it had always been. When he patrolled the streets, he didn't just look for crime. He looked for people who didn't belong. And on this particular afternoon, as the sun dipped below the rooftops, he found exactly that. A Chevy Impala. Black, slightly aged but well kept. It rolled through the neighborhood with quiet confidence, its tires humming against the smooth pavement. Brad's grip tightened on the steering wheel. A car like that didn't belong here. His gaze flicked to the driver, a black man, casually dressed, sunglasses resting on the bridge of his nose, unfazed, comfortable, as if he belonged. Brad felt a slow burn rise in his chest. He'd seen that look before, the kind that said, "I don't need permission to be here." And Brad? He hated that look. Isaiah Carter had spent a lifetime proving himself. From a rundown apartment complex in the city to multi-million-dollar real estate deals, he had climbed a ladder built to keep him out. He owned buildings now. Buildings people like Brad never thought men like him could afford. But still, his car never changed. The Chevy Impala wasn't about status. It wasn't about money. It was a reminder, a symbol of the first time he had felt success, the first time he had stood inside a dealership and bought something with his name on it, the first time he had looked at his reflection in the driver's side mirror and thought, "You made it." But in places like Oak Ridge, it wasn't about what you made. It was about what you were allowed to have. And as he drove down its pristine streets, he could already feel the weight of eyes watching him, measuring him, questioning him. It wasn't new. It never was. Brad flicked on his lights. The Impala slowed to a stop. Brad exhaled, stretching his fingers before stepping out of his squad car. He moved slowly, deliberately, the weight of his authority stitched into every step. A black man driving through Oak Ridge in an old Impala. It didn't matter who he was. It didn't matter why he was here. Brad had already decided what kind of man he was dealing with. He tapped the window with 2 fingers. Isaiah, unbothered, rolled it down. "Evening, officer," Isaiah said, his voice calm, even. Brad tilted his head, studying him. Not nervous, not fidgeting, just waiting. That bothered him. "License and registration." Isaiah nodded, reaching for his wallet. No questions, no protest, just compliance. He knew the game. "Everything all right, officer?" he asked as he handed over his documents. Brad glanced at the ID. Isaiah Carter. A name that should have meant something. A name that did mean something. Brad knew that name. He'd seen it on billboards, contracts, business deals. Wealthy, successful, powerful. But none of that mattered. Because here in this car, on this street, in this town, Isaiah Carter was just another black man behind the wheel of the wrong car. Brad tapped the ID against his palm, eyes narrowing. "Funny thing, Mr. Carter," he said, a slow smirk creeping onto his lips. "Man like you, driving a car like this." Isaiah's jaw tightened, but his expression didn't change. Brad leaned in just a little, testing. "Don't see many people like you in this neighborhood." Isaiah exhaled through his nose. He had a choice, to let this moment pass, or to make it clear. He turned his gaze to Brad, voice steady, unshaken. "I own 3 properties in this neighborhood." Brad's smirk faltered. Isaiah tilted his head slightly. "If you're looking for someone who doesn't belong, officer, you might need a different suspect." Silence. A heavy, loaded silence. Brad's fingers twitched. His grip on the ID tightened. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't the one in control. The streets of Oak Ridge had always told a silent story, one written in the fine lines of tradition and the unspoken rules of belonging. The houses stood tall, pristine, their white picket fences not just symbols of comfort, but quiet warnings of exclusivity. And the people? They carried that history in their glances, in the way they measured strangers who didn't fit the mold, Officer Brad Turner understood this town better than most. He didn't just patrol it, he protected it. And today, as he sat in his squad car, sipping lukewarm coffee, he saw something that didn't belong. A black Chevy Impala rolled through the neighborhood. A car like that didn't fit in Oak Ridge. Brad straightened, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. His eyes flicked toward the driver. A black man, dressed casually, but something about him seemed off. There was a confidence in the way he drove, like he had every right to be here. Brad's jaw tensed. In his experience, men like this were either lost or up to something, and either way, it was his job to find out. With a flick of his wrist, he turned on the flashing lights. The Impala slowed, pulling over to the curb. Brad took his time stepping out, letting the weight of authority settle in the air between them. The driver rolled down his window, his expression unreadable. He wasn't nervous. That irritated Brad. License and registration. The man handed it over without hesitation. The name on the ID made Brad pause. Isaiah Carter. He knew that name. Everyone in the county did. Real estate mogul. Self-made millionaire. But in this moment, none of that mattered. Because Isaiah Carter wasn't in a boardroom. He wasn't shaking hands at a fundraiser or posing for magazine covers. He was here, on the side of the road. And in Brad's eyes, he was just another black man behind the wheel of the wrong car. Brad tapped the ID against his palm, pretending to study it, though he already knew exactly what he was going to do. His gaze shifted, catching the glint of an expensive watch on Isaiah's wrist. A slow smirk pulled at the corners of his mouth. "Nice watch," he said, voice dripping with something just short of amusement. "That real? Or you pick it up at a flea market?" Isaiah didn't flinch. Brad hated that. He was supposed to flinch. Instead, Isaiah remained calm, his posture unmoving, as if this entire situation was just another meeting, one he'd already been in too many times before. Brad exhaled, slow and deliberate, before stepping back from the window. "You mind popping the trunk?" A pause. Isaiah turned his head slightly, his voice measured. "Is there a reason, officer?" Brad's smirk faded. There it was. The shift. The pushback. He had given this man a chance to comply, to make this easy. But now? Now Brad was in control. His fingers hovered over the radio on his shoulder. He didn't have probable cause. He knew that. But he didn't need it. "Step out of the vehicle," he said louder this time. Isaiah didn't move. Brad's fingers clenched around his belt. "I said step out of the car." Still, Isaiah didn't argue. He didn't resist. He simply obeyed. But Brad wasn't satisfied. Because power wasn't just about control. It was about making sure the other person knew who had it. Brad reached for his radio, pressing the button with just enough force to feel it. "Dispatch, I need backup for a suspicious vehicle stop. Driver refusing to cooperate." The words came easily, practiced, perfected. Isaiah's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He didn't have to, because he knew exactly what was about to happen. Humiliation on the roadside. It didn't take long for the other patrol cars to arrive. Sirens cut through the air, flashing lights bouncing off storefront windows. Oak Ridge had always been a town of spectators, and tonight was no different. People gathered near the sidewalks, some standing outside cafes, others peering through the windows of boutiques. Some whispered among themselves. Some smirked, nodding as if they had known all along. And others, they simply watched. Because moments like this were routine, expected. Brad leaned against the hood of his squad car, watching as two officers patted Isaiah down. Nothing. The trunk? Empty. The glove compartment? Registration? Insurance? A neat stack of business cards with Isaiah Carter's name printed in clean, bold letters. Brad folded his arms, exhaling through his nose. This should have been over, but still, he lingered. He needed Isaiah to know that this wasn't about finding something. This was about reminding him. You might be rich, you might be successful, but here, on this street, under these lights, you are just another man who forgot where he belongs. A woman across the street raised her phone, recording the scene. Isaiah saw it, and for the first time, Brad saw something flicker in his eyes. Not anger, not fear, something deeper, something Brad couldn't quite name. Isaiah's voice was calm, steady. "You're making a mistake." Brad's jaw tightened, because for the first time in this entire interaction, he felt something shift. It wasn't control, it wasn't authority, it was doubt. And for Brad, that was unacceptable. He stepped forward, dropping his voice low enough for only Isaiah to hear. "Guys like you," he murmured, "always play dress up, pretend to be something you're not. But at the end of the day, you can't even afford a decent ride." Isaiah inhaled sharply through his nose, but still, he said nothing. Brad smirked. That was enough for now. He turned to his officers, waving them off. "Cut him loose." The officers hesitated but obeyed. Isaiah adjusted his watch, dusted off his sleeves, and stepped back toward his car. He didn't look at Brad. He didn't need to, because as he slid into the driver's seat, as the crowd slowly began to disperse, Brad felt it again. That flicker, that shift. Isaiah might have been the one pulled over tonight. But Brad was the one left standing in the street, watching a man drive away with his dignity intact. And that, more than anything, was what angered him the most. Isaiah's hands gripped the steering wheel as he pulled back onto the road. He had been here before, not in this exact moment, but in ones just like it. He knew how the game was played. He knew how it always ended. They let you go, but they never really let you be. In the rearview mirror, he saw the patrol car still sitting there, Officer Brad Turner's figure rigid behind the windshield, watching, waiting. Isaiah exhaled slowly. He didn't need to look back. He had nothing to prove. A few minutes later, he approached the private entrance of Oak Ridge's most exclusive gated community. Massive iron gates loomed ahead, polished and pristine, designed to keep people out, not just physically, but socially. As he pulled up, the guard at the booth immediately recognized his car. The barrier lifted without hesitation. Isaiah didn't even have to stop. From behind, Brad watched, his brow furrowing. He had followed, not as an officer, but as a man unable to shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Isaiah Carter didn't belong here. Did he? Brad's fingers drummed against the steering wheel, his heartbeat picking up as he rolled forward, stopping just outside the gates. And then he saw it. The mansion. It stood at the end of a long, paved driveway, framed by perfectly manicured gardens and a custom-built infinity pool that shimmered under the fading sun. A massive fountain carved from imported stone sat in the center like a crown jewel. Parked neatly outside the entrance was a Rolls-Royce Phantom. Next to it, a sleek Bentley. Brad's stomach twisted. This wasn't just a house. This was an empire. And Isaiah Carter wasn't just visiting, he owned it. Brad's face drained of color as the weight of realization crashed over him. The man he had humiliated, the man he had treated like an outsider, a suspect, a nobody. He was the wealthiest man in Oak Ridge. Isaiah stepped out of the car, not even glancing in Brad's direction. He adjusted the cuff of his suit, walking toward his front door like a king returning to his castle. No hesitation, no urgency. Brad sat frozen in his patrol car, gripping the wheel like an anchor. He had spent his entire career deciding who belonged, who was suspicious, who deserved to be questioned. But now he was the one who didn't belong. A community stunned by mourning, Oak Ridge was buzzing. The video had gone viral overnight, shared, reshared, and dissected by every news outlet and social media account that thrived on stories of power, privilege, and injustice. A black man stopped and harassed in his own town. A cop exposed for racial profiling. And the twist? The victim owned more of Oak Ridge than the people trying to keep him out. The town council was quick to react, not out of moral outrage, but out of fear. Oak Ridge had always protected its reputation above all else, and now that reputation was tarnished. A formal statement was issued within hours. We do not condone racial profiling. We are committed to ensuring Oak Ridge remains a community of equality and fairness for all. The words sounded polished, carefully curated, empty. Meanwhile, Brad found himself under fire. The police department announced an internal review of his conduct. His name trended online, his face plastered across news reports. The town that had once quietly applauded his methods now distanced themselves. The same people who had looked the other way now looked at him with judgment. At the local coffee shop, the once friendly barista barely made eye contact when she handed him his order. At the grocery store, a few customers whispered when he passed. He had never felt like an outsider before. But Isaiah Carter's phone rang all morning. Some calls were from reporters, eager to interview him. Some were from business partners, offering their quiet support. And then there were the calls that truly stood out. Apologies. From neighbors. From Oak Ridge residents who had once ignored him in country clubs, in boardrooms, in high-end restaurants, where they had assumed he was just someone's guest. Now they wanted to acknowledge him. They wanted to say they were sorry. Isaiah listened to each message carefully. He didn't respond. Not yet, because words were easy. Change, however, that was something else entirely. The meeting room inside the Oak Ridge Police Department was silent, filled with an uneasy tension that no one dared acknowledge. The chief sat stiffly at the head of the table, his fingers interlocked in front of him. To his left, Officer Brad Turner shifted in his seat, his jaw tight, his gaze avoiding the man seated across from him. Isaiah Carter, the man Brad had wrongfully profiled, the man he had tried to make feel small. Now Isaiah sat calmly, dressed in a crisp navy suit, his presence alone enough to command the room. He was no suspect today. He was the man they had to answer to. The chief cleared his throat, his voice carefully measured. Mr. Carter, first and foremost, let me say that what happened to you was unfortunate. Officer Turner, he made an error in judgment. Isaiah's expression didn't change. He had heard this before. A mistake, an error, a misunderstanding. Not once did they call it what it really was. Racial profiling, discrimination. Brad finally spoke, his voice lower than usual, stripped of its usual authority. I apologize for the inconvenience. Inconvenience. The word felt like a slap, but Isaiah didn't flinch. He leaned forward slightly, locking eyes with the officer who had humiliated him just days ago. I'm not here for an apology, Officer Turner, he said, his voice steady. I'm here for accountability. Brad shifted uncomfortably. Isaiah continued, his words deliberate. Do you know what the problem is with apologies? They don't change anything. You can say you're sorry all day, but tomorrow someone else will be pulled over for looking suspicious. Someone else will be humiliated for no reason other than the color of their skin. So tell me, what happens after this? The chief exhaled heavily. We'll review our training, ensure our officers understand proper protocol when engaging with residents. Isaiah cut him off. That's not enough. The room tensed. Brad clenched his fists under the table, feeling the shift in power. He wasn't in control anymore. I want real change, Isaiah pressed. Bias training, community outreach, public accountability. Not just for you, Officer Turner, but for every officer on your force who thinks a black man in a nice car is a reason to be suspicious. The chief hesitated. This wasn't the simple, quiet meeting he had planned. Isaiah's voice didn't waver. Because if nothing changes, then you're not sorry. You're just afraid of bad press. The silence was answer enough. Isaiah pushed back from the table and stood, buttoning his jacket. This isn't over, but I'm done listening to excuses. It's time Oak Ridge starts listening to me. And with that, he walked out. Days after the meeting, Isaiah stood in front of a vacant commercial building in downtown Oak Ridge. The faded for lease sign still hung in the window, but Isaiah had already signed the papers. This wasn't just a business investment, it was a statement. A few members of the press had gathered, along with local residents, some watching out of curiosity, others with genuine interest. Among them were young black students, kids who had grown up in Oak Ridge feeling like outsiders in their own home. Isaiah cleared his throat, looking out over the crowd. I spent my life working twice as hard for half the respect, he began, and last week I was reminded that no matter how much money I make, how much success I earn, some people will always see me as less. The murmurs in the crowd hushed, but I am not less, and neither are you. The younger audience members straightened their backs slightly. So today I'm announcing something new, something this town desperately needs. He gestured to the building behind him. This will be the Carter Mentorship Center, A place where young men and women, especially those who come from backgrounds like mine, can learn business, real estate, and financial literacy. So that one day when they walk into a bank, they don't ask for a loan, they buy the bank. A wave of applause rippled through the crowd. Isaiah continued. Oak Ridge has spent too long deciding who belongs. It's time we start building a future where we all do. The applause grew louder, drowning out any lingering whispers of doubt. And for the first time, Isaiah felt something he never had before in Oak Ridge. Not tolerance, not quiet acknowledgement. Respect. 1 year later, Isaiah stood at the edge of his sprawling estate, watching as guests arrived. The event was a celebration, a symbol of change. Among the arrivals were local business owners, students from his mentorship program, and even a few members of the town council who had once ignored him, but now sought his approval. As the sun set, laughter and conversation filled the air. But beyond the gates, in the shadows of the street, stood a man who no longer had a seat at the table. Brad Turner, once a respected officer in Oak Ridge, now unemployed. His resignation had come quietly, after more complaints surfaced. And now he was the one on the outside looking in. His fists clenched at his sides as he watched the scene unfold. Isaiah Carter, the man he had belittled, underestimated, tried to break, was thriving. Brad had spent his career trying to keep men like Isaiah in their place. Now Isaiah had built a place Brad could never enter. Isaiah glanced toward the gate, his eyes locking with Brad's for a brief moment. No words were spoken, but Brad felt it. This wasn't revenge. This was reality. Isaiah gave a small nod, not of mockery, but of acknowledgement. Then he turned, walking back toward his guests, his success speaking louder than any insult ever could. And Brad? He stood there for another moment, staring at the life he had tried to diminish. Then, with no one left to intimidate, he walked away.